must be hard for you. Did you tell him folks on the outside are rooting for him and that people are reading his book more than ever?
I did tell him. I told him I was going to go on your show and I was going to talk about it. He wants to get the word out there. He wants people to understand what's going on in this country. And I tell you, I've never seen him or listened to him more negative about what he thinks is going to happen economically. I mean, he is really, really worried.
Tell us what your dad has to say. He's a smart guy. Tell us.
Well, he couldn't say much because he's losing his short-term memory. So a lot of the things he just kept saying to me over and over again without any recollection that he had already told me. But he is very concerned about the financial position of the U.S. economy and what's going to happen when the dollar collapses or the Fed has to, or the Congress has to admit that they can't make the Social Security payments. They can't make any of these payments. And there's, riots and food shortages and energy blackouts. I mean, he's really, really nervous about the civil unrest that he sees developing in the United States as a result of this problem blowing up. And I think, we can get in a later segment, the next one, and talk about, what's going on in the economy and the Fed.
Sure, well, I skipped the break. Let's get into the meat and potatoes. I'm not going to even play the clips. You're on record at Europac.com. You were on record being criticized in the national media for saying they will not raise interest rates, and now they haven't raised interest rates. Break that down, and the latest since you were on a month ago.
Well, first of all, the important thing is the excuse, right? Because everybody is still buying the lie. This is part of the show. So Janet Yellen came out and said, okay, we were going to raise interest rates, but now we're not because of China. We're worried about these problems overseas, and so we're not going to raise rates. And the media buys it, right? But that's not the truth. Janet Yellen is lying. I said this in the beginning, that they are going to come up with one excuse after another. And it doesn't even matter what the excuse is. It's whatever makes the most sense at the time. Whatever is the most convenient, that's what they're going to blame it on. Because look what Janet Yellen said, the same playbook. She said, we're not raising rates now, but we may raise them in October. Well, that's in 6 weeks. Well, if the Fed is so worried about the problems in China, they're not going to go away in the next 6 weeks. So why not say we're not raising rates in October either? Because that's not their playbook. The script that they've been operating under is pretend we're going to raise interest rates in the future, but just don't raise them now. And the whole reason for this is to make believe that there's a real recovery and that they're confident they can raise rates. And they come up with one excuse after another why they don't raise them, because if they ever did raise them, it would pierce the recovery myth, because the air would come out of the bubble that much faster. We'd be right back in recession. We'd have another financial crisis, and they'd be doing QE4, and they would look like fools.
And to show how disconnected they are, even the Fed head up in Omaha thinks they're really going to raise it in the next few months, to show how the New York Fed is keeping the other Fed groups out of the loop. Break down how that whole group works, because people think it's just one unified Federal Reserve. They don't understand how the real board works.
Well, you have various member banks. You have different people that are part of the Federal Open Market Committee, so they all have a voice. But I think it's easy to dissent if you know that the majority is going to make sure that your dissenting opinion doesn't actually happen, right? So it's easy to say, hey, I think we should raise rates, when you know everybody else is going to make sure that rates don't go up. Right, so then you could look like you're the responsible one, but everybody else is preventing the rate hike. But I'm sure even the guys that say they want to raise rates, if it came right down to it and their voice was, the vote was the deciding vote, they don't want to raise rates, because that will expose the myth.
Sure.
Right? The Fed wants to pretend they can raise rates, because theoretically raising rates is a sign that everything is better, right? But they want to pretend everything is better without proving that it's not.
Well, you accurately hit the nail on the head, and you told CNBC, and we put the article up, there's video, you said just last week, you said, I predicted what the Fed would do correctly. Now I'm going to predict what the stocks are going to do. Let's get into that.
Well, I actually never said anything about what the stock market was going to do on that interview, but I do believe that the
Sure, well, that's their headline. Let me give you the headline then so you know. We'll put it back on screen. It's Schiff, I'm right about the Fed, I'll be right about stocks. So what's that about?
Yeah, I don't know where they got the headline on stocks, but the only thing I did say is that I thought that the stock market needed QE4 in order to not fall, which is what I believe. I think that just keeping interest rates at zero is not enough to support the market. This market is really propped up. It's a huge bubble. It needs air. It needs QE4 to stop from deflating.
And it needs the Fed to keep buying the bonds, right?
Well, absolutely. That is QE4, right? It needs to. The Fed has to expand its balance sheet if it wants to stop a bear market, and I believe it does want to stop a bear market. It's not going to admit that. It's not going to say that's the reason, but it also wants to prop up the banks. It wants to prop up the real estate market. This reminds me a lot. What's going on now? You go back to 2006. I'm going to put together another video of some of these clips again of me talking about the housing bubble, which was so incredibly obvious to me and should have been obvious to everybody, but it wasn't. What was going on and what was going to happen when that bubble burst. And it's the same thing all over again. This is so incredibly obvious, yet everybody is oblivious to the problem and how it's going to be resolved. And maybe, I don't know, is the Fed this dumb? Or do they know it now, and are they just lying to cover it up?
Sure, let me ask this question. It's the classic damned if you do, damned if you don't. We're going to break in 1 minute, but try to answer it now or after. Explain to people how it's bad if we do keep doing the QE, but how it's bad if we don't, but then it's probably better to go ahead and raise interest rates. Explain that when we come back. Peter Schiff's our guest. And when I know we got phone calls about the Pope, I'm going to work you in. We can get his take on that as well. His answer is wealth redistribution. His answer is class warfare when he's exempt from taxes and above the law. And they've got headlines about Obama basking in the aura. I mean, I'm going to throw up here in a minute. I mean, this is truly sickening to have a Marxist Pope. I mean, we are in deep trouble. I mean, that's all I can say is we are in deep trouble. I mean, if you think the economy's bad now, wait till they bring in more government control, more taxes. This is really bad news. Stay with us. We're going into a total crony capitalist society where they use socialism, communism, social engineering to control and dumb down the public. I mean, communism, socialism doesn't work. It always ends in disaster. You've got the ultra-rich, a lot of them that are robber barons that got their money through government contracts, who are waging war against the nouveau riche, the middle class, and the working poor. It's been that way for really thousands of years. It's feudalism. Peter Schiff's our guest. I know we got loaded phones to talk about the Pope, Desi, and folks like Dave, Matt, and others. We'll get to those in a little segment where we talk about the Pope and get Peter Schiff's take on that. I know he's an economics guy, but he joins us for a full hour, so it's important to get his take on other things like we did about his father in prison, because we're more than just a financial show or a news show. We get into the humanity of what's happening. We're going to go back to our guest from Euro Pacific Capital. The website, of course, is on screen, europac.com. Briefly, I have storable food because I know society can completely unravel and collapse. I'm working to stop that from happening. We could turn the free market back on at any time, and I believe reverse a lot of this. I'll ask Schiff his take on that in a moment. But regardless, I've got high-quality storable foods, and we only bring you sponsors that are the very best. That's why for 4 or 5 years we've had My Patriot Supply. They started 6, 7 years ago and have become in the top 3 in the country because of low pricing, high quality. We have the entire line of My Patriot Supply, their latest discounts, they're changed every week at InfoWarsStore.com. When you purchase it there, it helps support this broadcast. I want to thank you for that. But we're now private labeling the exact same food, but they're able to give us even lower price through InfoWarsSelect.com. That's also at InfoWarsStore.com. It's the lowest price they've ever offered in their history. I've had their CEO on 2 weeks ago. They've extended it 1 week because it was going to end in just a couple days. They're extending it till October 1st, and this introductory lowest price ever on the highest quality storable foods will end. You can call and ask questions about it, or you can go to InfoWarsSelect.com or InfoWarsStore.com and click on the storable food area or call toll-free 888-253-3139. The elites are storing food. They've got emergency seed banks. They're digging in. That's even in the London Guardian and the New York Times. I'm not saying everything's going to collapse. I didn't say Jade Helm would be martial law. The media makes that up. I'm saying this is important insurance to have, just like car insurance, probably more important. Going back to Peter Schiff of Europac.net, Europac.com, again, billions under management, predicted the many of the bubbles, implosions, predicted, if you don't know who he is, most of you do, the situation with the housing bubble before it happened in 2008, has predicted that we would see a worldwide economic recession and a depression in the last few years. We're now entering into that. Most areas of the world are in a depression or in conflict. We're not seeing that yet here because we're like, islands are just mountains in the ocean. And as water rises, it covers other islands that aren't as high, but the water's rising. The question is, how high will it rise? So, Peter, that was my question before the break. For the folks that just joined us, I'll recap it. You say we're in trouble if we continue QE. We're not in. We're in trouble if we get rid of it, but we should get rid of it. What do you see coming down the road as they don't get rid of it? And why is it better to get rid of it and raise interest rates?
Well, it's just like a drug addict. I may use this analogy a lot, but, if you're addicted to drugs and you make a decision that you're going to kick that habit and you check yourself into a rehabilitation center, right, your life is going to change in the short run, and it's going to get a whole lot worse, right? Apparently, or I guess if you're doing drugs, you're having a good time. That's maybe why you're taking drugs. You feel great, you're high. But if you make a decision that you want to kick that habit and you go to rehab, now you're going through withdrawal, right? You're not, going to Club Med. You're not going to have a good time. You're going to have to, adjust to a normal life. And so that means a big change in the way you live your life. But it's better than continuing to do drugs and then maybe being dead in a hospital bed of an overdose. And that's where we are. We've got this phony economy that's propped up on this monetary heroin, and we need to stop. We need to, we need to go into economic rehab. That's what would happen if the Fed raised rates. It wouldn't be fun, but it would be a positive step. It would be a healing experience as we restructure the economy. What would that look like? It would mean that we had to stop spending money, tear up our credit cards, live within our means. Asset prices would come down, like stocks and real estate. A lot of banks.
Yeah, that's the good part. Is that what we need would get cheaper?
Well, yeah. Well, the cost of living would go down. Look. Home ownership is at the lowest it's been since 1967. It's like a 48-year low. But if you take out the older people, for young people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, it's never been this low. Why? Because real estate prices are too high. Well, if the government lets the bubble pop, real estate prices will plunge, and a lot of people who are renting might be able to afford to buy a house. A lot of things will become more affordable.
That's right. This economy is only good for the engineers at the top who know where the market's going to go, who get the money first. They're the ones riding the bubbles. All the rest of us get screwed by it.
But, a lot of things are going to change. Like right now, Americans, we buy a lot of stuff on credit. We have a lot of cheap stuff coming in from China. We take it for granted, but it's going to change. I mean, Americans are going to have to stop throwing things out and buying new stuff. We're going to have to repair the stuff that we have because we don't have the factories anymore. And we can't keep borrowing money to import the things that other people produce with their factories. So this is going to be a painful adjustment process back to a viable economy that grows based on underconsumption, saving, and investment, where the consuming is the reward for the economic growth, the production and the savings. We've got it backwards. We claim that we're a consumer-based economy. You can't have an economy based on consumption. It's a disaster. It's a bubble, which is what we have. But the Fed wants to perpetuate this. The Fed doesn't want anybody going to rehab. The Fed doesn't want people realizing that that's where we need to be. They want to keep the party going. They want to keep the high going. So they are going to come back with more QE. They are going to keep rates at zero, but they don't want to admit that that's what they're doing. So they have to come up with excuses and reasons.
Well, I have to say, you didn't just predict, and I'm not kissing your butt here, it's true. You didn't just predict that they wouldn't raise it. You explained years ago what the rope-a-dope was, the philosophy, and now that I look at it, you can really see them teasing people and creating this illusion, but then always pushing it out. How long do you think till they do finally raise it, or have they decided to just never do it? I mean, how far will they inflate this currency?
Well, I think their plan, if they can pull it off, is not to raise rates and then to have some bad stuff happen, and they can say, we were ready to do it. Everything was working. Everything was going great. But something happened that nobody could have possibly anticipated. And because of this crazy event that happened somewhere in the world,
9/11.
We're going to have to postpone what we were going to do. We're going to have to do QE4 because everything, we know it works because it had worked. And the whole idea of talking about raising rates allows the Fed to claim victory, right? They get to have their cake and eat it too, because they can claim, like, everything is great, we're going to raise rates, but they don't actually raise rates because the easy part is bringing rates to zero. Any central bank could do that. The impossible part is lifting them back up again once you've got everybody addicted to zero.
Sure. What does it signify that China is moving out of U.S. treasuries? I mean, what does that signify?
Well, I think that Chinese are smart. I think they can read the writing that Americans can't. I think they have a lot of treasuries, and they want to get rid of them. And I think it's not just China. You have countries all around the world that have loaded up on treasuries. They're going to sell.
Is that the beginning of moving towards the exits? Because you've been saying the last few years that when we see them starting to dump U.S. bonds, that's the big sign.
I think it is a big sign. And, right now there's still speculators buying the dollar on the idea that the U.S. economy is sound and that the Fed's going to raise rates. But it's all because the Fed says it is. I mean, if you actually look at all the economic data that comes out every day, it's weak. The data hasn't been this weak since the Great Recession. Yet nobody pays attention to the actual data. They just look at Janet Yellen. And as long as Janet Yellen says everything is great, nobody cares what the data is. They're all waiting for the Pied Piper, Janet Yellen. It's like, the emperor has no clothes. No one wants to admit the emperor is naked until Janet Yellen says it,
Let me ask you this, and I want to go to some phone calls. You're making you put your crystal ball cap on, and I know you're not making a prediction here, but in your gut, what you tell your wife, what you tell your family, what you're telling our audience now, how do you see this going down the next 6 months? What do you see happening this fall? A lot of folks like Dent and others that have been pretty accurate like you, they think it's imminent, that it's going to get a lot worse a lot quicker. But we know they've got a lot of weird tricks up their sleeves. The market's so rigged now, interest rates, the stock market, that they can, suspend reality for a while longer, kind of like Wile E. Coyote runs out over the cliff, and for a minute he doesn't fall because he's not really in the real world. He's being drawn by Mel Blanc.
Yeah, well, it's not until he looks down that he realizes he's no longer on the ground. And
exactly.
I think that Wile E. Coyote phenomenon is going to happen because a lot of Americans don't realize there's nothing beneath their feet but air. And what's keeping it going is just the Fed's credibility. But how much longer can it maintain credibility by bluffing it's going to raise rates but never delivering? And if it actually does deliver on a rate hike, it's just going to accelerate the collapse that much further, because if the Fed does raise rates by a quarter point, the markets are going to start anticipating the next quarter and the next quarter, and it's going to unravel even faster. So they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, which is why I think they're going to take the path of least resistance, which is leave rates at zero and keep pretending they're going to raise them until there's something that happens where they have to do QE4. And maybe it's going to be the jobs numbers. I mean, at some point, these job numbers are going to turn south with everything else. I mean, all the other data has already turned to recession. The only thing left is the employment data, and that's coming.
But don't they admit most of the employment numbers are cooked anyways?
They don't admit that, although Janet Yellen, even in her last statement, when they didn't raise rates, she said, we're still waiting to see improvement in the labor market. What improvement is she waiting for? If the unemployment rate is as low as it is and the employment market is as great as she says it is, why does she need to improve more? That just proves she's lying. She knows that the labor market is lousy, and if it's lousy now in September, it ain't going to be any better in October or December. In fact, it's probably going to be worse.
Well, do you think Dent and others are right then that they think by later this fall or winter we're going to see a huge stock market plunge?
Well, look, I don't think the Federal Reserve is going to allow a huge stock market plunge. I think at some point, if it looks like the market is in danger of that big a decline, QE4 is going to be announced. So they're not going to allow their own bubble to deflate. They've spent years blowing air into it. They're not going to let it, implode. So she's going to stop the stock market from collapsing. If I thought that the Fed was actually going to raise rates the way everybody believes they're going to do, then the stock market would crash, and maybe Dent would be right. But if the Fed does what I believe they're going to do and, comes with more QE, then it's the dollar that's going to crash, not the stock market. And in fact, what's putting pressure on all the emerging markets, commodities, gold, is the belief that the Fed is going to tighten monetary policy. That's what's crushing the entire world. And until Janet Yellen admits she's not going to do that, then it's not going to change. And the irony of it is Janet Yellen is saying, I don't want to raise rates because of the problems overseas. The problems overseas are because she's going to raise rates, or everybody thinks she's going to raise rates.
Well, it's like CNBC.
Which means she can't.
It's like CNBC famously a few years ago said, aren't we all just slaves of central banks? And then they cut the 5 guests all agreeing. I mean, this is really, I guess, the great question. Now, can central banks and bureaucrats suspend economic reality? And can they pump a bubble up to Zimbabwe proportions and not have any blowback from that? And I just think common sense says it can't.
No, look, all bubbles pop. And the problem is the bigger they get before they pop, the more damage when they pop. And this is the biggest one yet. And remember, people, I was on CNBC and the guy Scott Nations was saying, Peter, how is it possible that you're right and everybody else is wrong? Well, you know what? That's what happens. That's what happened with the housing bubble. And again, I'm not the only one, but there are not that many of us. But yes, I was right, and almost everybody was wrong. All the big banks, including the Federal Reserve, including Janet Yellen, were completely oblivious to the housing bubble and any of the consequences that were going to hit the economy when that bubble burst. I laid it out exactly the way it happened.
Sure.
And here we are again. Fast forward 2015. It's the same.
Could it be Chicago?
The same monitor.
Could it be? Could it be L.A.? Could it be Puerto Rico going bankrupt? I mean, we don't know what the trigger. War with Russia. I mean, who knows what could trigger this thing going crazy?
Well, look, just the threat of higher interest rates is what's doing it after 7 years of 0%. But my point is, we are around the corner from a much worse economic crisis than 2008. But 2008 was still big. It was the worst downturn since the Great Depression, and nobody in the halls of power saw it.
Because they didn't want to see it.
Nobody in Wall Street, nobody at the Fed, nobody. Just a handful of people that they thought were crackpots. Some of those crackpots got very rich, but very few people saw it. And now it's the same situation all over again.
I agree. I want to go to some calls here on the Pontiff and get your take after we take one or two, because it ties in economically. His answer is more government. Desi, in Louisiana, you're on the air. Thanks for holding your take on His Excellency visiting Obama and this huge socialist love fest. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Well, what an honor, Alex, to be on your show. I just want to thank my friend Nub, who turned me on to your show about 2 years ago. First-time caller. You nailed this Pope, Alex. He's totally evil. Him and King Jihad, Barack Obama, two peas in a pod. Things that you talked about 2 years ago when I first listened, they're coming to pass. The Catholic Church and the Vatican City over there, totally evil. I just wanted to thank you for being on your show, Alex, and go to another caller. Thanks.
Well, God bless you. We're going to go to break in a moment, come back with more on this, but I never get into religion. I don't bash Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Hindus. I mean, there's good people all over. But this Pope is so political, and he's here to lecture America how we couldn't have air conditioning. I mean, this is austerity. And it seems like him and Obama are joining forces. The UN's coming out of the closet for world government. This Pope's announced world government. What's going on, Peter Schiff? We're going to skip this network break.
Yeah, if the Pope really cared about the people, I mean, and again, maybe he does, but if he really understood and wants to help, he should be embracing capitalism, freedom. That's what lifts people out of poverty. I mean, it's not government programs. Government programs create and perpetuate poverty.
And we know that. It's a historical fact.
Yes, he ought, instead of just reading the Bible, he should read history. He should understand what made America so wealthy in the first place, and it was the absence of government.
Everybody wanted to come here.
Yes, he's here. We did more, certainly, to lift people out of poverty than any other country. Now, unfortunately, ever since the government declared war on poverty, poverty's been on the rise. But before the government decided to battle poverty, capitalism was destroying.
They started battling it in the 40s, and now we've got the biggest wealth redistribution, the biggest divide, the smallest middle class ever.
Yeah, I mean, we need less government, right? Redistributing a shrinking pie is not the solution. Yet, it sounds good, but even, in the Bible, they talk about, you tithe 10%. I mean, they don't really, endorse or recommend socialism there. So I don't know, why the church has officially embraced the doctrine that has so failed miserably throughout time. I mean, look at these countries that have been communist. Look at the rampant poverty. I mean, look at all the poverty in Africa. I mean, it's not because of freedom and capitalism that there's so many poor people in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, look at what the governments are doing to their own people in these countries. Go there and lecture those governments. Now, the fact of the matter is, there are problems in America, but it's because the government is doing too much, not because they're not doing enough.
Well, that's absolutely a fact. And he didn't criticize Fidel Castro and his 500,000 political dissidents in jail. He's going to come here and criticize our prisons, which would be fine if he criticized the communist prisons. I'm all for criticizing prisons. We just did it earlier in the hour. It's just why is the whole power structure, whether it's Warren Buffett or bad-mouthing capitalism, when they've gotten so rich from it?
Yeah, well, again, it's a lot of people like to be liked. That's part of the problem because so many other people embrace socialism, and it makes you look good if you pretend or you show your compassion by how much you're in favor of these government programs. But of course, being compassionate and generous with somebody else's money is very easy. And there are a lot of liberals that want to do that. But again, that's just theft, rebranded as democracy, but it's still wrong. And if the Pope is a religious man, and of course he is, he knows that theft is wrong, right? There's a commandment there that says don't steal. It doesn't have a little asterisk by it unless the government does it for you, right? You can't vote for other people to steal for you. If it's wrong to steal, then it's wrong to do it indirectly through elected politicians.
Bingo, absolutely on target.
Celebrate the spirit of freedom and liberty upon which our nation was founded at InfoWarsShop.com. Molon Lave is ancient Greek for come and take it. This popular design combines both classic Greek Spartan imagery with modern M16 assault rifles. Now available in women's tees and proudly made in the USA. And now you can protect yourself from corrupt cops with the InfoWars dash cam. It's your car's black box that records all that the driver sees and hears. And introducing the Block It Pocket. It renders your phone undetectable while protecting your private data and your health. Or take back your privacy and protect your personal information by getting your very own Detractor cell phone pouch. So get incredibly high-quality, freedom-based products and help fund the revolution at InfoWarsShop.com.